It is June 19th, 2024, and the White House is now scrambling to respond after Netanyahu released quite the video in which he claimed that the U.S. was withholding weapons and ammunition for Israel. Now, as the White House is pointing out, they have no idea what he's talking about. Why? Because even though the Biden administration says that it withheld just one single shipment of weapons, they have continued on to provide billions of dollars worth of lethal aid to Israel for the last 8 months, knowing exactly how deadly Israel's bombing is, knowing that they target civilians on the Gaza Strip. So now we're in a situation where the same Biden administration that last week was trying to explain why there wasn't magically a ceasefire deal that they initially claimed was Israel's plan, why that wasn't coming together. Now they're having to explain why Netanyahu is throwing a temper tantrum and saying that he's not getting enough US weapons. It is ridiculous when you look at the politics of it, especially given the fact that the death toll in Gaza continues to grow as Israel continues to target Palestinian civilians in horrific ways that violate every international law on the books. We discussed all of that and more earlier with a special guest, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Dr. Ramzy Baroud, a Palestinian-American journalist, author, and editor of the Palestine Chronicle. Dr. Baroud, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that the White House is busy doing some damage control today after Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu published a video accusing the U.S. of withholding weapon shipments to Israel. Now, in response, the Biden administration says they have no idea what Netanyahu is talking about, as they've only withheld a single shipment that we know of while letting billions of dollars in weapons and ammunition flow to Israel, even though they know exactly who it is being used against, that being the Palestinian civilians on the ground. What do you make of Netanyahu's temper tantrum and the response we're seeing from Biden's team?
Right. So I think we have to first look at the context of what the US has been doing since the beginning of the war. As you said, they have been giving billions of dollars of weapons, deadly weapons, to Israel that have been used mostly against Palestinian civilians. So there's no secret about the US role in the genocide in Gaza. And we are even beyond the conversation on whether it's a genocide or not, which was the question earlier on in the war, because the ICJ itself, the International Court of Justice, is already investigating the genocide. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, is about to issue arrest warrants against several Israelis and Palestinians, accusing Israel of extermination in Gaza. So you have terms that are being used by Western institutions, the world's largest international courts, using words like genocide and extermination. Language that was not used since World War II, by the way. So, so here we are. And who is financing and allowing this genocide and extermination to happen? The United States of America, our government, Washington, the Biden administration. We can't blame this on anybody else. We can't blame it on the radicals within our rank. No, it's the Biden administration that's supposed to be democratic and liberal and all the good stuff. The fact that the US would respond to Netanyahu's tantrum by saying, no, 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 what are you talking about? We only denied you few kind of bombs not to use in Rafah in southern Gaza. Otherwise, everything is good and dandy. What's the problem? I mean, that is in itself shameful. Now, of course, the way that the media is kind of reporting on this is that the rift between Israel and the US is growing, or between Netanyahu and Biden. What rift? One is saying, you are not giving me enough weapons to finish the genocide, and the other is saying, I'm giving you plenty of weapons to finish the genocide. That is the actual conflict. So we have to be very clear on what is being disagreed on now. The Biden administration has made it very clear that they will support Netanyahu until the very end. Maybe there are a few things that are leaked via Axios, Politico, some of these kind of well connected liberal mainstream media that shows some sort of disagreement happening behind closed doors. As far as the Palestinians in Gaza are concerned, as long as the bunker buster and the 2,000-pound bombs are still being dropped in my neighborhood, it doesn't matter what kind of so-called drift or disagreements happening behind closed doors. They don't read Axios, they don't have access to the internet to begin with to read any of it. As far as they are concerned, Israel is waging a genocide that would have not been possible without American support. The Biden administration is still committed to Israel despite of the fact that the whole world is saying you need to end this genocide.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think I'm with you, it's been frustrating to watch kind of the media coverage of this, and they act like, "Oh, you've got Biden and Netanyahu on opposite ends of the spectrum," and it's like, "Well, actually, no, they are very much in agreement." It's just that in this case, you have Netanyahu putting out this video, which was almost a little confusing. I don't know if his goal was to get the Biden administration to come out and say, "Oh, yes, we support you," or, "Oh, we'll provide more support." But the language that Netanyahu used in this was that he called for the US to, quote, to send more weapons to, quote, finish the job. Now, I'm assuming that he's meaning the defeat of Hamas, but when we look at Gaza, Hamas is nowhere close to being defeated after they go through Rafah. That still is not going to be the end of Hamas. What do you make of the language there? And is this just a game that Netanyahu is playing of how long he can hold on to power and keep claiming that, okay, we are on the cusp of defeating Hamas, and just hope that everyone, especially in the US, will ignore reality?
Netanyahu is like a mad scientist at the moment. He is acting with this idea that if he keeps mixing various chemicals, there's going to be that single variable that's going to make all the difference and everything is going to be okay. So he has been adding variables all the time. The Shifa hospital variable, okay, we destroyed it, we butchered hundreds of people, nothing happened. Maybe if we dig deeper under the Shifa hospital, nothing happened. Al Ahli Hospital, the Baptist hospital, the Kamal Udwan Hospital in Khan Yunis, nothing happened. He takes the doctors, he kills the doctors. The latest doctor that we realized was murdered during interrogation by the Israeli Shin Bet, the equivalent of the FBI, was yesterday. One of Gaza's most prominent doctors, Dr. Iyad al-Rantisi, he died under torture last November. They just revealed the news right now. So there's always this variable, but maybe the answer lies in Khan Yunis. No, maybe it's further north. No, maybe it's Rafah. Now, all eyes are on Rafah, this hashtag that kind of took the world by storm. Essentially, Netanyahu wanted all eyes to be on Rafah. That's exactly what he wanted to do. If you are fighting a guerrilla warfare or you are fighting against movements that are using guerrilla warfare tactics, you don't announce your intentions to attack months in advance. It just makes no sense from a military point of view. You say, I'm going to attack the north, but then you attack Rafah instead. Netanyahu has been building this case, thinking that Rafah is going to be the ultimate variable in his war. And he built this massive campaign around it. He had people, his supporters all across the US and Europe rallying behind the Rafah, as if the resistance is waiting for him to Rafah to come and attack. He attacked Rafah. Nothing happened. As we said, nothing was going to happen because it was the rational possible conclusion that nothing is going to happen. Now they are claiming that they have destroyed 2 or 3 brigades out of the 5 that were stationed in Rafah, as if the guys were sitting in fixed buildings and waiting, drinking Turkish coffee, waiting for the Netanyahu army to arrive. Of course, none of this is true. And it turned out that the opposite was true. The Israelis kind of ran away from many areas in Rafah because of the attack on the Nimr vehicle, the Israeli military vehicle that is known as being the most fortified in the world, killing 8 soldiers and officers and wounding others, and another attack and a third and a fourth. So not only they couldn't achieve anything out of Rafah, but also they lost so much and they got humiliated in Rafah. So after Rafah, where do you go? Back to Khan Yunis, back to the north? But still, because mad scientists are called mad for a reason, He still thinks that there is still that variable. But in the process of doing so, he is dragging Washington with him. Not, I'm not defending Washington in any way, but American foreign policy is rational, as chaotic as they can be. Traditionally in the Middle East, they are rational. You either go to war as they did in Iraq and you do so much damage, but you try to stabilize the situation after your war, or you use what they call the containment policy, which was quite popular in the during the times of democratic leaderships. Containment as is in putting sanctions on certain governments we don't like, certain rulers we don't like, and that sort of thing. The U.S. is venturing into a whole new foreign policy strategy that they are unfamiliar with. They are not containing anybody. They are not able to win the war. They keep adding more bombs and more bombs and more bombs, and yet the war outcome cannot and will not be determined using military force. And now they are becoming even more aware of that fact, where American officials would say things like, we don't think that this war is going to be, or Hamas will be destroyed through military force. Even Daniel Hagari, the spokesman for the Israeli military, as at last has made that declaration himself a few days ago when he said that we don't think the military option is enough. If you have reached that realization, why are you only invested in the military option? And why is this whole debate over the bombs? If you send bombs or you are holding bombs, it just doesn't make any sense. And this is why I think the chaos is now not in Israel itself. Israel is in the biggest chaotic political periods they've ever experienced since 1948, but the chaos has reached Washington. Washington doesn't want this war. They want to end this war. They want to stabilize the region so that they are able to contain Ansarullah al-Houthis in Yemen. They don't want a major war against Lebanon because they know that it's going to be, at best, is going to be a lose-lose situation, at best. But it could actually be worse for Israel. They don't want any of these things, and they know that other countries are making their moves. Russia, China, and others are making very important geostrategic moves in the Middle East and beyond. They want to end this war, but they don't have the courage. They don't have the courage to tell Netanyahu stop. And speaking of courage, for many years, and I remember since I was a young journalist like you, I used to always, we kind of find ourselves in these debates on who is, is the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? Who is controlling the other? Is Israel in control of American foreign policy? Or American foreign policy actually uses Israel as a client regime, but we tend to blame Israel for everything, but in actuality, the problem starts in Washington. Well, Washington it is indeed not a helpful partner in any of this, and they have been a reason of behind much of the destruction and the chaos in the Middle East. In this particular case, it is Israel that is wagging the United States. Netanyahu is dragging the US with him to a war that Biden does not want to fight, but does not have the courage to say, stop.
Yeah, yeah, and it's been, I mean, it's obviously frustrating to watch as an American, but then I look at kind of the political breakdown and I realize, oh, wait a second, if Biden actually were to call for any legitimate accountability here, right? If he were to say, I'm cutting off the weapon shipments tomorrow, this is it, we're not doing this, we're, dragging Netanyahu to the Hague, so to speak. Well, then you just have Trump on the other end, and he comes in and he says, oh, well, Biden has abandoned our ally Israel, and he campaigns on that, and AIPAC backs him up. And it's almost this lose-lose situation when you look at our top two contenders for this upcoming presidential election. And yet, when you get away from all of the politics of it, as you were mentioning there, I mean, we have seen massacre after massacre that Israel has carried out, targeting hospitals, targeting refugee camps, homes, every possible place where in the past you would think that international law would play a role in protecting people. It seems as though there are no rules, there is no place that is safe. And I think the recent massacre that Israel carried out on a refugee camp in which they killed hundreds of Palestinian civilians in order to then say, oh, look, we got a few hostages, while they also killed multiple hostages, including an American citizen. And the US just does nothing. But at the same time, you also see kind of the international world, they really have not done well, they certainly have not done enough, but it feels as though they haven't done much, even with the progress that we have seen at the ICJ or with the UN Security Council. How do you see kind of this international response to Israel's ongoing crimes in Gaza that just continue every time that we think that they can't get worse than they, leave a child beheaded or burned to death or do something that just feels unimaginable, but yet it's how we speak?
What you're saying reminds me of the concept of the interim, that of the great intellectual Antonio Gramsci, where he argues that during certain historical periods, there is always a process in which the old is yet to die, and the young is yet to be born. So you are kind of living, and we are living in this stage right now where the U.S. is a declining empire, no longer has all the cards, no longer able to impose its will on the international community, but it's still powerful enough that can do a lot of damage in the process of decline. And then you have the new rising powers, including, by the way, some in Western Europe itself, as far as Palestine is concerned. I mean, you have Ireland, Spain, Norway, Luxembourg, Sweden, and other countries that are, beginning to take a stronger position regarding Palestine. The deputy prime minister of Spain, for example, ended her speech a couple of weeks ago referring to the Israeli genocide in Gaza by saying, "From the river to the sea, Palestine would be free." I mean, we could have never imagined, a leader in a Western European country would use that statement. Not now, not in 50 years. So things are happening in tandem with the damage that the Americans are creating. The Americans are not able to control outcomes because they don't have all the cards. But on the other hand, we are yet to see the kind of rising powers in the West and in around the globe that are able to make the difference to stop this war. And that's what Gramsci refers to as the age of monsters. The age of monsters. This is where Netanyahu becomes a monster. That's where this butchery, this mass murder, extermination, genocide is happening because neither I am able to stop it nor the other is able to finish the job, as the Americans would put it. So Palestinians are kind of stuck, and they are stuck with this monster called Netanyahu doing so much damage. But I think the future damage is gonna go way beyond Gaza. I mean, we are already seeing the destabilization of the Middle East. Let's not even call it destabilization, because destabilization means destabilization according to how stability is defined according to the status quo that is imposed by the United States. I mean, that stability is really hasn't been very conducive and very helpful for millions of Palestinians and Arabs and Middle Easterns in that region. Let's call it a complete paradigm shift that is happening before our own eyes, where Yemen becomes a geopolitical actor, where Hezbollah is rising in power, that is actually able to slow down the American and Israeli and Western killing machine, and is able to actually offer something substantive to the conversation. So all of this is going to have repercussions, but I think the repercussions will go even beyond that. And I'm talking particularly about the legitimacy of the international institutions that the Americans and the West has imposed on the rest of the world without any consultation with the global south, without any conversations with Africa or Asia or South America. This is the outcome of World War II, the ICJ, eventually the ICC, the United Nations, the Security Council, the veto rights. All of this is an American led process. Even though the Americans are not even part of the ICC, they have control over the outcomes because they, as we just learned, that they can actually impose sanctions on the very judges whose responsibility is to ensure that international law is being respected. What will happen in the future? How can anyone after the Gaza war defend international law according to the American vision? How can anyone truly believe that international law is possible when Gaza is being finished off? So I think these repercussions are gonna start playing out in coming, not even years, in coming months, and we are gonna start seeing that there is a major shift within the international scene as far as American leadership and legitimacy is concerned.
Yeah, and you continue to see the US picking proxy wars all around the world. So it is interesting to me that it's not just this one issue. It's not just that they are, so supportive of Israel that they will look the other way as Israel commits genocide in Gaza and continue to provide the weapons. It's that they are continuing on this path to World War III on a number of different avenues. Now, going back to a point you made earlier about how the US is kind of in this position right now where they don't want to see escalating tensions in the way that Israel does in the region, right? Israel wants war with Iran, they want war with Hezbollah all at the same time. And the US is kind of the Biden administration specifically because they're headed to re-election. They're kind of sitting back and going, okay, why don't we calm down a little bit while again still providing more and more weapons? Now, we heard from Biden a couple weeks ago. He comes out, he says, "Oh, we have this three-phase ceasefire plan. Israel's on board. We just have to get Hamas on board." Israel is kind of like, we didn't agree to that. But the US doesn't focus on that. They just focus on Hamas. They get the UN Security Council to endorse this plan. Well, then Hamas comes along and they say, okay, we want to move forward with this. However, we have to focus on permanently removing the Israeli military from the Gaza Strip, or else what is the point of this? They know that once they give up the hostages, then that is the last string that they have on their end to get Israel to agree to something. And yet the focus now seems to be on the fact that Hamas would dare to present any changes, not on the fact that Israel has never been on board with this plan to begin with. What do you make of the back and forth there? Is there any hope for a ceasefire plan at this point?
I mean, the fact that this is the outcome, this is the conclusion of American politics and politicking after 9 months of genocide, where Biden would give a speech in which he says this is an Israeli plan, and the Israeli says we didn't agree to this, and Hamas would say, but Israel didn't agree to it. And the Americans say to Hamas, don't worry about it. Blinken, for example, to Al Jazeera and Sullivan, to other media, don't worry about it. The Israelis said it's okay, but the Israelis publicly say it's not okay. So Hamas says, okay, fine. We are willing, we view this positively. We are willing to discuss the three stages of that proposal, only to discover that the written version of the plan does not guarantee the moving from phase one to phase two to phase three. No, phase two is to be negotiated all over again. So all you want is to take your captives or hostages or whatever, and then start the war all over again just to get a little bit of a rest to your army. So naturally, they are going to say, we reject the notion, we agree to the Biden proposal that was communicated verbally, but that's not what was written down, because it seems that what was written down had to pass through the Israeli filter. And instead of the Americans saying, well, you do actually have a point, let's go back and revisit the written form of the proposal and make it more consistent with the declared verbal proposal by Biden. No, they invested in nothing but blaming the Palestinians. Again, I mean, this happened before, by the way, when Yasser Arafat, chairman of the PLO, met with Ehud Barak under the Bill Clinton administration during Camp David, and they were trying to impose certain things on Arafat, coerce him, intimidate him to accept, and he refused. And American media, including Clinton himself, blamed Palestinians for rejecting what they called the generous offer. The term the generous offer, books have been written about the term generous offer, speeches have been delivered about the generous offer, which once again put the Palestinians in a position that they are the ones who are rejecting the peace overtures of Israel and the United States. Years later, we actually discovered that nothing was written down. There was no offer, generous or otherwise. And the whole thing was mere propaganda used by the Americans and the Israelis to sabotage the so-called peace process, which is an American imposition. The exact same thing is happening now. The only difference, though, is that nobody is believing them. It didn't turn this major turn against Hamas internationally or against the Palestinians. Nobody is supporting or applauding Israel for trying its best, but those terrible Palestinians have rejected the Israeli overture. None of this. So I think it backfired. If it's anything, it made the United States look silly, as if they are a conduit in some sort of even a sillier plan by Netanyahu and Israel. I mean, can you imagine this? Someone is declaring a peace proposal or a ceasefire proposal on behalf of another, and the other is saying, "You're lying, I didn't say these things." The international media, even mainstream media, is reporting on that. I know that they try to hide so much of the facts, but it is so obvious you can't hide this sort of thing. I think it backfired, and I think the whole thing is already behind us as far as the Biden speech is concerned.
Yeah, it's so interesting their decision to come out and to say, "Oh, this is an Israeli proposal," to then double down on that, claiming, "Oh, Israel is behind it." It's like, okay, either the Biden administration is blatantly lying, or they were told one thing and now Israel is making them look ridiculous. Certainly, a lot at stake here all around, and I know that it is the Palestinians on the ground who continue to pay the price for all of this. And I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Dr. Ramzy Baroud, a Palestinian-American journalist, author, and editor of the Palestine Chronicle. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.